Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you're doing well. It's finally autumn, so I made this video because of all of those Brat Summer is Dead comments and articles. Um, After Charlie XCX submitted a post to Twitter or X that reads, Kamala is brat. I think these are the same kind of people who participated in cancel culture, culture appropriation, and ACAB, or all cops are bastard, that ended their brat era prematurely. Prior to the video you're watching right now, I made a short video in response to internet's busy music nerd Anthony Fantano giving Brat the album a 10 out of 10. And well, I'm glad people can give it a 10. It's fun and shifts the mood from I just want to dance and have a little line with loved ones to a midlife crisis on the dance floor, all the while inaudible tears rolling down my cheeks. However, I don't agree with his rating of it. I do love how Brat brings us together to just raving and not caring about anything else in our busy, boring lives. The marketing is genius. Neon green with its basic bold black letters uncapitalized to show off its laid-back attitude, and grain to appear off-putting. A minimalist approach but effective. The remixes, for the most part, enhances or make the whole song perfect. I'm talking about Girls So Confusing featuring Lorde, which literally made the internet go crazy. It takes more than being open and honest, one's vulnerability, to make an album a 10. As a songwriter myself, being authentic is a given, but I really distaste when people expect us to be when music is art. So we are creating stories and those aren't necessarily truthful because we can be pretty boring. So music is a way out of the mundane world for songwriters to explore and create an exciting version of it. So pop stars are fake beans and that's okay, but back on track. I am hyped for Charlie's upcoming album, Brat, and it's completely different but also still Brat, so I may give that one a 10, mainly because Charlie really shines when she collabs with featured artists, like with her song Guess featuring Billie Eilish. The duo complemented each other seamlessly, although I love Lorde feature way better. Don't hate. While I was doing my research on Kamala for this video, Charlie added context behind the endorsement, that she didn't know how heavy her words would carry into helping in someone's political campaign, gravitating more to, quote, something positive and lighthearted, end quote, than political, and stating the obvious that she's no political artist, but she did also double down on the endorsement, telling Vulture, quote, I'm happy to help prevent democracy from falling forever, end quote. There is, of course, her following Kamala Harris on Instagram when Harris campaign team Kamala HQ astutely used the branding of Brat following the endorsement.
They picked it up and ran with it, and that was cool. There was a young gay man on that campaign, I think, who said, let's go.
You're Brat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's cool. And, you know, obviously, like, happy to be on the right side of history.
I think Charlie is a little worried about losing fans, and my advice to that is to follow the Brat mindset. Own up to what you did. You're going to lose fans regardless because not everyone is going to agree with things you say. Now, let's get into the video. Part 1. What is Brat? First, who is Charlie XCX? British pop star XCX, known for her left field of music and accredited as the face of the music genre hyperpop, was raised in Essex, a county in the UK. She loved Britney Spears and the Spice Girl as a small girl. It wasn't until she listened to Ufi's iconic song Pop the Glock on MySpace, and furthermore discovered other artists from the French electro music label at Banger Records, did Charlie XCX decide to make her own music, officially releasing her first album, True Romance, in 2013 at age 21. She became known as a feature and collaborator in huge hits like Iconic Pop, I Love It, 2012, and Iggy's Azalea Fancy, 2014. She wanted to be her own pop star and did that with her second album, Sucker, in 2014. It was her first album to have a song boom clap hit the Billboard Hot 100 chart. But to Charlie XCX, that album was fake to her. It wasn't who she was as an artist. It wasn't until she met A.G. Cook and Sophie, who tragically passed away in 2021, did her music career change for the better. It was then that Charlie XCX became one of the earliest and biggest successful pop star in the hyperpop genre, producing album bangers like Vroom Vroom EP in 2016, Number One Angel in 2017, Pop 2 in the same year, Charlie 2019, How I'm Feeling Now 2020, and her most recent album that is everywhere, Brat, of this year. Note, I excluded Crash 2022 from the list because it's her sellout album, and not to say it's bad or anything, but it's the same creative direction as Sucker. On July 2024, Charlie XCX posted Kamala is brat, shocking the internet, or at least the chronically aligned. Some were enthusiastic by it, while others were either upset or plain curious. Older Dems and Republicans were especially on the latter of, what the heck is brat? Charlie says it best. A girl who is a little messy and likes to party, maybe say dumb things sometimes, who feels herself but maybe also has a breakdown but kind of parties through it. Is very honest, very blunt, a little bit volatile, like does dumb things. Brat was released on June 7 of this year, hence the term Brat Summer, and scored a 95 out of 100 on Metacritic, and also a 10 out of 10 if we include Anthony Fantano's rating. It's said to be Charlie's most vulnerable and best work to date. The reason why Brat is a good thing to be is that we aren't without our flaws. The album mostly talks about the singer's self-worth and constant obsession to compare herself to other women in the music industry. Allegedly but evident, Charlie sings about how she is jealous of Taylor Swift's mainstream success in her song Sympathy is a Knife. In the past, Taylor Swift invited Charlie to be in her 2018 Reputation Stadium tour, only for Charlie to feel small on stage when she was outperformed by Swift. Like, yes, people are there to listen to Taylor Swift, but it's completely embarrassing to have a crowd that won't acknowledge your existence. Then there was the song Girl So Confusing, which people speculated was either about Marina or Lorde, because the song mentioned poetry and a long overdue collab to write a song together, but it turned out to be Lorde, that talked about the singer's selfish desire to be better than Lorde, who is oftentimes compared to Charlie, so much so that Charlie gets confused with Lorde.
You're a singer, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I am. He was like, I knew it. I love your song Royals. And I'm like, oh.
It's not a diss track at all, but rather it's being confused about why she feels this way about another female artist and her relationship with Lorde. Whether or not Lorde secretly hates her, Charlie actually wants to make it work, and it did work out with the remix when Lorde opens up on her own insecurities with her weight and not looking good enough for pictures, which is why Lorde makes the excuse to not go out with Charlie to avoid the paparazzi. And on the same wavelength, Charlie's song Rewind talks about her own body image issues and being nostalgic of simpler times when that didn't matter at the slightest in her career. Lastly, her song So I touches on the late Sophie, who also played a big role in her career, made Charlie feel intimidated with thoughts of not matching up to her level of cool. So Charlie, full of regrets, doesn't like to sing songs that she worked on with Sophie, since they remind her of not being there for Sophie. Charlie also contemplates for the future about becoming a mother, which would affect her music career on her song I Think About It All the Time. The silver lining is that the album ends with the song 365, a much faster club song to her song 360 about enjoying life in the moment and giving zero fudges. It takes courage to face your fears and be motivated to take initiative. You take charge of your life by understanding your purpose, doing what you love, forgiving yourself, and being comfortable in your own skin. Brad is all of those things. Similar to Jules LeBron's sarcastic phrase, very demure, very mindful.
You see how I do my makeup for work? very demure, very mindful. I don't come to work with a green cut crease. I don't look like a clown when I go to work. I don't do too much. I'm very mindful while I'm at work.
At its core, Brat is an album where all Charlie wants to do is play her music loud at a club and give people the best night of their lives through remembering why she made music in the first place, to blow our minds and make us excited with sound that breaks the rules of pop music. Sophie was one of those reminders as Charlie sat down to listen to a track from Sophie for the first time ever, and then years later in a podcast describing that past experience.
Wow, this reminds me of me being like 14 on MySpace, trying to digest this bratty Lily Allen vocal with this kind of like uffiness, with this justice electronic thing, but also sounds completely different and fresh and new and nothing like that French like 2007 thing.
Women, not excluding men, have to remember they're not alone and they can be so alike, which is where Kamala Harris ties into Brat, stressing the importance of truth.
We must speak all these truths, and one of the most significant and important truths right now is also that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And let's speak and own that truth, in particular in the face of those who are trying to have us point fingers at each other and divide us.
Part 2 is Kamala Brat.
What can be, unburdened by what has been.
What can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been. What we can see, what we believe can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been.
Again, courage means facing your fears and taking charge of your life. By what Harris meant in her quote, "What can be unburdened by what has been," she is saying a future is made possible where young girls and of color see a woman president and can aspire to be when a woman becomes president. And as we know, Harris is far from perfect.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
But that's all the more for girls who see themselves as future presidents, because Kamala is not larger than life or is trying to be. She is always laughing, never too serious, but she also has ambitions to do great work.
It is very dangerous to make a person larger than life, because then young men and women are tempted to believe, well, if he was that great, he's inaccessible. And I can never try to be that, or emulate that, or achieve that.
Charli XCX and Kamala Harris are both women mixed with Indian. While they come from different careers, they're both workaholics on their own fields. So while there are people who belittle their achievements because of their race and gender, they are proud of their work, and not many people can say that. What makes Kamala Harris Brat is her boisterous laughter, and that makes her the life of the party. To quote one of America's great black poet, Maya Angelou, she's a legend. Don't trust people who don't laugh.
I never trust people who don't laugh, who said, I'm serious, and act as if they put airplane glue on the back of their hands and stuck it to their forehead. I think you're not serious, you're boring as hell. But if you're serious, you really understand that it's important that you laugh as much as possible.
There's no authenticity without putting on a show. Americans don't want to see a boring person on stage. They want to see someone more interesting. Part 3. Why do they hate Kamala Harris and why we shouldn't? Kamala Harris was best known for taking child sexual assault cases when she was a deputy district attorney. She worked as a prosecutor first in Oakland, then in San Francisco for over 2 decades and was top prosecutor or district attorney of San Francisco in 2004. She actually campaigned against her own boss, Terrence Halian, and defeated him for his position. And she was re-elected for a second term by the people of San Francisco. Then she won her campaign against her opponents in 2010, California Attorney General election and voted again for a second term by the people of California. She was victorious again when she became Senator of California in 2017 for one term before being appointed Joe Biden's Vice President of the United States. On Vanity Fair, filmmaker J.J. Abrams described Kamala Harris as inspiring. Quote, "She invents innovative ways of dealing with seemingly intractable problems. See her success in managing elementary school truancy. She is fun as hell. The best belly laugh in politics award goes to her. Deeply decent and wise well beyond her years." End quote. And before you talk about her truancy policy that unfortunately affected the poor, typically people of color in California, she had good intentions to prevent kids from dropping out of school and joining street gangs like David Hill, who killed and shot a police officer, who I'll discuss later on in the video, and to prevent schools from losing money for education, which depends on students' attendance. And also, there were some district attorneys who took advantage of her truancy law when she didn't intend to harm low-income families, but rather a conversation to keep students in the classroom by giving them support or whatever assistance to help their child come to school. Because Kamala was a prosecutor, that meant she worked with the police, and that's going to be a deal breaker for those who believe in ACAB or all cops are bastards. There's a claim on her record for locking up black and brown people, which Tulsi Gabbard slammed Harris on. Laura Bazelon, a law professor, wrote an opinion piece on the New York Times about Harris being not progressive and then prosecuting wrongful convictions, which seems to be where people get the tea on Kamala from. Harris has also been called transphobic for denying gender-affirming health care to a trans woman inmate. But the biggest reason people hate Kamala so much is because she supports genocide. So is any of this true? Partially no, and I'll explain why. Let's get into it. To say Kamala Harris was awful to black people is nonsensical. In fact, she spared the life of a young black man, David Hill, from the death penalty. When she was the newly appointed district attorney in 2004, 21-year-old David Hill shot and killed police officer Isaac Espinoza. In Harris' campaign to becoming district attorney, she made a promise to not seek the death penalty. So this was an early brutal position for her to be in to test her integrity. Will she choose to grant justice to a respected police officer and gain police approval, or will she choose to not only keep her promise, but to grant mercy to a black mother's son? As I said before, she chose the latter. Police officers were hoping, practically begging, for Kamala Harris to be on their side, so this decision provoked the ire of the law enforcement. On top of that, the California Senator Dianne Feinstein drew shade at Kamala Harris during Espinoza's funeral and embarrassed her with a myriad of police in blue uniform turning their heads simultaneously at Harris' direction. The atmosphere was stiff and awkward. Kamala Harris reflected on this. It would have been better for her to make the decision after the funeral to avoid an embarrassment like that. It goes without saying that she is not a bootlicker for cops.
Negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
I won't lie, when I saw that debate between Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris in 2019, I was like, you go, girl. I thought Tulsi Gabbard dragged Kamala on that debate, but today I know that Gabbard fed us misinformation. Her claim about Harris' record as a prosecutor of putting over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violation, while the actual number is much higher, this was during her position as Attorney General. It is the district attorney job to handle marijuana cases.
As Attorney General, I didn't prosecute marijuana cases. I didn't prosecute any cases. The DAs did. So that's just a flat out lie. We didn't prosecute marijuana cases.
Harris was taking on the big cases like negotiating for a $20 billion settlement for California homeowners who were facing foreclosures and a $1.1 billion settlement for students and veterans who were being scammed by for-profit colleges. It was not her job to prosecute marijuana cases.
I'm a lawyer in Pittsburgh here, and I just admire your work so much.
Good. What kind of law you practice?
Consumer protection.
Good for you.
I'm protecting consumers.
Good for you. You know, that's the work I did as AG. That's good stuff.
When Kamala was San Francisco district attorney, there were 1,956 people convicted, not locked up, for marijuana during her 7 years in office, and only 45 people were sent to state prison, which is less compared to her predecessor, Terrence Hillian, who was soft on crime. Paul Henderson, a gay black man who worked under Harris as her prosecutor in drug-related cases, said, quote, "Our policy was that no one with a marijuana conviction for mere possession could do any jail time at all," end quote. Offenders would pay a fine but no jail time for having marijuana or if they gave it away. If it was sold, it was a felony. California used Health and Safety Code 11357C to reduce felonies into misdemeanors since it was illegal back then in California to have marijuana.
The swipe of my pen, I can charge someone with a misdemeanor, the lowest level offense possible.
Then 1 year before she became Attorney General of California, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed a bill in 2010 to make some marijuana misdemeanors into infractions, lowering the number of convictions in California. There were actually 1,883 people sent to state prison from 2011 to 2016, not just in San Francisco, but throughout the entire state of California for marijuana. Therefore, Kamala did not prosecute over 1,500 people from 2011 to 2016. Those were the district attorneys. They answer to no one. Let's use common sense. If allegedly thousands of people were jailed in California for marijuana convictions from San Francisco alone, it would have made headlines. The San Francisco Police Department, who already had a bad relationship with Kamala, would have spoken out against her. As a matter of fact, why would people vote for her again to represent San Francisco? Tulsi Gabbard was one of Donald's coaches for his ABC debate between him and Kamala Harris.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
It was totally unhinged. Kamala mopped the floor on that debate. Hopefully, that sheds a light that Tulsi Gabbard's claim about Harris was just as outrageous as Trump's claim on Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. Tulsi Gabbard had no problem reading her script of lies because she doesn't know the function of a DA and an AG. And she took advantage of the fact that regular Americans don't know either. It's not like Kamala Harris just stood there as Tulsi Gabbard launched her attack. It was the opposite. Kamala put Gabbard in her place.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. So, you know, on public policy, I often tell my team, look, I don't want to hear about public policy is a fancy kind of speech or paper. Tell me how it'll affect a real person.
Fancy speeches as in fancy talk, which means boastful talk or claims that are exaggerated. Or fancy by itself means imaginary. Imagination. I'll be honest, I was thinking fancy like Iggy Azalea and Charlie Fancy, and I think many of us didn't process that word as anything but elaborate. Oh, you think you because you got intel on me, unless you knew Kamala was calling her full of crap, which she was.
Sir, you just said that you're creating the story.
What's that, Dana?
You just said that this is a story that you created. So the eating dogs and cats thing is not.
We are
accurate.
creating. We are.
Then Kamala Harris pointed out that Tulsi Gabbard, who worked as a legislator in Hawaii, is all bark and no bite.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
Kamala Harris didn't explain or felt the need to explain herself or over-explain on her record because she was not guilty of that. Only the guilty feel the need to explain themselves. She doesn't got time for that. So here's my question to you, Tulsi, and to my audience. What would you have done differently if you were the one having to make those hard decisions like Harris had? It's way too easy to criticize someone than it is to actually doing the work. I also think it's important to mention another claim Gabbard made on Harris, which was keeping people in prison beyond their sentences to use as cheap labor for the state of California. But as it turns out, someone in her office made the argument, save for no one was being kept beyond their sentences. That was a straight up lie. The state was being sued by the prison law office in Berkeley, California for not providing adequate medical care to its prisoners, violating the 8th Amendment to the Constitution back in 2001. Then in August 4, 2009, a 3-judge federal court found overcrowding to be the problem, ordering the governor of California to make a plan to reduce its prison population. But the state fought back. In 2011, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the 3-judge panel to reduce its prison population to 137.5%. So some of its prisoners were transferred into county jail. In 2013, the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation was ordered to expand good credits in order to give early releases to 5,385 low-risk nonviolent inmates. And it was the AG office duty to defend its client. In fall of 2014, her prosecutor Patrick McKinney argued not to release them because, quote, extending 2-for-1 credits to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome while California is in the middle of a difficult fire season and severe drought, end quote. Kamala wasn't in charge of the program to have prisoners volunteer to do labor work such as fighting wildfires. That is a program run by CDCR. Governor Jerry Brown was also the one turning down the decision to free inmates early because he was concerned for public safety. He had the power to free them, not Kamala Harris. And when Kamala read the newspaper that someone in her office made such a wild argument, I'm sure she spat her coffee that morning because who even comes up with such an argument?
What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid. That is why we put them in dormitories, and they have a resident assistant. They make really bad decisions.
It's undeniable that Charli XCX is a progressive pop star artist, and the same could be said about Kamala Harris. Kamala started a program called Back on Track San Francisco when she was the DA to help young adults who were first-time low-level offenders, specifically those between ages 18 to 24. Although anyone below 30 was eligible to join, get high school equivalent of diplomas with employment and out of the criminal system with their conviction wiped clean, because having a conviction can really hurt someone in finding a job and etc. The goal of Back on Track was to reduce the number of repeated offenders, which is being smart on crime. A decade later, she would release a pilot program, Back on Track Los Angeles, in 2015 as California's Attorney General, with participants being all male between ages 18 to 60. A quote attributed to Mark Twain says, "When I was 17, my father was so stupid. I didn't want to be seen with him in public. When I was 24, I was amazed at how much the old man had learned in 7 years." End quote. I think many of us can relate to that. I remember when I used to think I was so much smarter than the adults around me, but I really was a frog in the bottom of a well, not knowing there is a much bigger world outside of that well. It's why I shake my head when young adults pick and choose what is cultural appropriation, because, you know, they wouldn't be caught dead wearing a Mexican sombrero, but go on, cook and eat our food. America isn't a place to divide us into boxes. It's a place of freedom to share and evolve as human beings. Harris also refused to prosecute young girls for prostitution, and instead she treated those cases as victims. That's why Harris co-founded Coalition to End the Exploitation of Kids in 2002, delivering safe housing for those victims, and served in a task force, the California Alliance to Combat Trafficking and Slavery Task Force, dedicated to stopping human trafficking in 2007. Years later, into 2012, she convened a new and up-to-date anti-trafficking work group when she was AG. Harris understood that the ones that should be prosecuted are the pimps. After the crime lab scandal happened, when a lab technician, 29, working there, was caught sneaking in cocaine that resulted in taking 600 to 1,000 of drug cases, she quickly did something about it. Kamala says on a SF Gate article on April 26, 2010 that she has 3 proposals for reforming and is implementing, quote, more stringent procedures to ensure that the district attorney office gathers evidence of misconduct by police department officers and employees, end quote. And when the crime lab scandal resulted in the integrity of police officers being questionable, Harris did implement a trial integrity unit to re-examine cases where a police officer was a witness in trial and disclose police officers' criminal backgrounds to defense lawyers.
Senator Harris created that unit in that office weeks after the crime lab scandal. But the thing is, people are not mentioning it. And that's what I have issue with.
According to UC Hastings law professor Rory Leto, quote, about 90% of prosecutor offices in U.S. have no system for determining whether law enforcement witnesses have records that should be disclosed, end quote. Yes, the crime lab scandal is on Harris, even though she was not in charge of the crime lab. Kamala Harris was responsible for making a bratty policy or system to obtain information of past crimes from police officers and civilian employees in San Francisco, but she didn't until that led to the event. The silver lining is to set an example to why transparency and accountability are important. In the midst of the scandal, her office was doing everything possible to right the wrong. While the immediate action for integrity was because of the scandal, it was still an action made by Harris. Holding police officer accountable is progressive. When Kamala Harris first became Attorney General, she made it a priority to test all 1,300 or so untested rape kits that were kept and locked away in a storage room because she believes in testing DNA and proving innocence or guilt.
I'm proud to tell you, as of the end of last year, we eliminated the backlog entirely, and there is no more and will be no more backlog of DNA testing in the California Department of Justice.
So while Harris was slow to act on Cooper's case, info on that shortly, she did help survivors who were raped. And that is another progressive move from Harris, as nobody before her took the matter as a priority.
She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so.
Kevin Cooper is mentioned by both Tulsi Gabbard and Laura Bazelon, except that Except the Kevin Cooper case is not an easy case to prove his innocence. He was supposed to be sentenced to the death penalty in 1985 for the murder of 4, as well as slitting the throat of an 8-year-old boy who fortunately survived. But there were too many variables that didn't make sense, even though they found his DNA at the scene of the crime. When Senator Harris found out about the case, she sent a request and demanded for there to be a retesting. Like I mentioned before, Kamala has kept her promise to not seek the death penalty as top prosecutor, and she has been in support of DNA testing. The false narrative that Harris blocked DNA evidence came from Nicholas Kristof, a New York Times columnist who has written and defended Cooper as a black man framed by white deputies and corrupt politicians. When the beloved bodybuilder and movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California, he rejected Cooper's clemency for DNA testing twice. To be fair, Schwarzenegger had little time to review the second clemency petition, so he entrusted it to the soon-to-be governor of California, Jerry Brown. Brown claims he didn't know about it. Cooper had to petition again in 2016. For 2.5 years, Jerry Brown did not act until a graphic article by Nicholas Kristof that was posted online on May 17, 2018 went viral. Only then did Jerry Brown at the end of 2018 grant new DNA testing to be done for Kevin Cooper. My argument is that Kamala Harris did not know about the case. Harris found out about the Kevin Cooper case once she learned about Kristof's 2018 online article just a day after it was published. Cooper believes Jerry Brown, quote, left the clemency petition in his office or in the trunk of his car or in the attic or in the drawer or whatever, end quote. It is the governor's job to grant or decline a clemency, not the attorney general. It is why the Innocent Project wrote a letter to Governor Brown in August 2016 to grant Cooper his clemency. People were sending letters to the governor in support of Kevin Cooper because he has the authority to free him. So forward to 2018, Kamala Harris is the California senator, and she emails and or calls Kristof that she feels awful about the Kevin Cooper situation. She also posted on social media in support of Kevin Cooper. This was before he gained the following support from Senator Dianne Feinstein, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, Kim Kardashian, and Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church. When Harris calls Kristof on the phone to say, quote, she regrets her failure to allow testing, end quote, she meant that she failed to notice there was a man requesting for DNA testing as AG. The Attorney General handles appeals, not clemency. She wouldn't have known about it. Kristof gave his thanks to Harris for speaking up on Kevin Cooper, but he still blames her, insisting she blocked advanced DNA testing without proof to back up his claim. Despite the effort, Kevin Cooper couldn't prove his innocence. In 2021, Governor Gavin Newsom of California made an executive order for law firm Morrison Foerster to conduct an innocent investigation in Kevin Cooper case, which the law firm reported on January 13, 2023. Quote, the evidence of Cooper guilt is extensive and conclusive, end quote. Laura Bazelon and Charlie Nelson Keever would then go on and make an article called Why California Reinvestigation of an Infamous Quadruple Murder Case is a Sham on the San Francisco Chronicle, arguing that the law firm didn't do well in investigating his innocence. The reality is it's a complicated case to get Cooper out of death row based on what they have and what they know. On August 21, 2024, Kevin Cooper wrote a letter regarding Kamala Harris, which can be found on Vanguard News Group. In one piece, he writes, I was the one wronged by then Attorney General Kamala Harris, yet I am forgiving her. If I can do so, how dare a political party who doesn't give a damn about poor people, especially black and brown people, try to help themselves by using me to hurt her. If a Republican had been the Attorney General at the time I requested DNA testing, they would have done the same thing to me, or worse. In fact, they already did, and that is why I am in the current position I am in, end quote. Laura Bazelon addresses Kamala's record and wrongful convictions. One is a white man in opposition to this redundant black innocence narrative, and a former neo-Nazi, which Laura Bazelon purposely left out on her article. He was sent to prison in 1999, and because he had 3 felony convictions, a California law by the name of 3 strikes meant he had to be sentenced for more than 25 years in prison. Daniel Larson was wrongfully convicted of possessing a concealed knife, and because he had a bad lawyer who would later be disbarred that failed to present any of the several witnesses from a parking lot outside of a tavern that could have easily testified that he didn't have a knife on him to the jury, the California Innocent Project took his case in 2002 and filed a habeas petition to the Federal District Court for the Central District of California in 2008. Jerry Brown, the Attorney General at this time frame, argued against it in defense to the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act bill. In other words, the petition should be denied because it missed the 1-year deadline of being filed. The federal court chose the former to see if they can prove actual innocence. After a year, there was a hearing with 3 witnesses, a former police chief of North Carolina, James McNutt, and his wife, Eleanor McNutt, who were visiting, had encountered Larson, but they saw that he neither possessed nor drew a knife that night. The 3rd witness was Brian McCracken, who was inside the bar and had been threatened by a man with a knife, but said that the man was not Daniel Larson, though he knew of Larson initially. Magistrate Judge Suzanne Siegel of the U.S. District Court concluded that Larson was actually innocent in her April 27, 2010 report and recommendation. And on June 14, 2010, the U.S. District Court Judge Christina A. Snyder ordered for the reversal of Larson conviction based on that report and recommendation from the magistrate judge. 4 weeks later, Jerry Brown's office appealed for his release, so when Kamala Harris became the new Attorney General, her office too appealed it for the same reason, the AEDPA. So why did her office appeal a man who was actually innocent? Well, when she won Attorney General of California, she upheld an oath to fight gangs and keep the public of California safe. Daniel Larson was part of a white supremacist gang, so her office was tough on gang criminals. In her inaugural speech, it writes, "As Attorney General, I am going to lead a renewed collaboration effort against gangs and organized crime. Put simply, organized criminal gangs represent the #1 public safety challenge facing California. In collaboration with our federal and local law enforcement partners to fight the gang problem will be a major focus of our work," end quote. Her office argued that Larson was a threat to the public. In the end, he won and was a free man. What may seem to be like her biggest humiliation as AG was when her office prosecuted to keep Johnny Baca in prison based on perjury, but the Ninth Circuit Court blew the case out of proportion, and Baca was far from innocent. Before I start, there's something I want to highlight, and that is the Orange County DA office using jailhouse informants to help prosecutors in weak cases. Most of the time, these informants end up unreliable for the sake of getting something in return, honestly, and thus easy for the defense attorney to defend against. It's why it's kept secret between the prosecutor and the jailhouse informant to obstruct obstacles. So with that said, I'm going to assume that a Riverside County prosecutor, Robert Spira, used a jailhouse informant. A past Riverside County prosecutor, Robert Spira, promised a jail inmate, Daniel Melendez, a reduced sentence if he snitched on inmates that confessed to their crimes. Melendez lied to the court that he was not promised a reduced sentence for testifying as a witness against Baca, and prosecutor Spira supported the lie. Melendez testified that Baca admitted his murders to him. On February 20, 1998, When it was Melendez's turn to be tried for his own crimes, Spira was caught suborning perjury when Melendez's attorney asked for a reduced sentence for testifying against Baca, but that the DA office refused to reduce Melendez's sentence because the office wanted to protect the record in Baca's case, or keep Baca from claiming that the jail informant got a deal out of testifying against him. The trial court did not buy that Melendez testified out of the goodness of his heart, and so Melendez's sentence was reduced from 14 years to 11 years. On October 2002, Melendez and Spira were once again put on the stand by the prosecutor that prosecuted Baca, Paul Vingred. Not only did Melendez follow through with the lie of not being promised a reduced sentence for testifying against Baca, Spira tried to argue the modification was due to a credit error and that it had nothing to do with Baca case, when in fact that was not what was shown on the transcript. It was sheer fantasy. Baca appellate lawyer Patrick J. Hennessy tried to reverse Baca's second conviction on the basis of prosecutorial misconduct in 2004, but the state appeals court judge denied it. The state appellate judge were especially upset that the Riverside County DA office fought tooth and nail to convince the Court of Appeal not to read the transcript. In 2011, Judge Patrick Welch denied it, the reason being that the perjury did not merit dismissal, as there was strong enough evidence to suggest that Baca is the shooter. So even without the perjury, Baca would have still been convicted. Baca was convicted back in 1997 for the murder of two gay lovers, John or Jack Adair and John Mix, from 2 years ago. Jack Adair made it out alive, at least for another 10 days before his passing, receiving 2 gunshot wounds and bleeding profusely. After Jack called the police, two deputies, Moore and Tinsinski, and their Sergeant Walker, all asked the question, "Who did this to you?" Jack said, along with spelling it out, Baca, B-A-C-A, to all 3 of them. In addition to that, Baca stole Jack's BMW on that same day. After his arrest, Baca told Melendez, the snitch, that he took part in the murder for hire credited by Jack's adopted son, Tom. Tom knew that Jack would remove him from his will, so he promised Baca half of the insurance money if he helped with his diabolic plan. Now, Melendez claimed that he knew Baca from the streets and approached Baca first. Melendez knew personal details like Baca quitting his job at a Chinese restaurant after meeting the son, working as a caretaker, expressing disgust on the son's gay fathers. Melendez knew about the .38 caliber gun, which was not yet known to the general public. Speaking of, Tom's ex-girlfriend testified that Tom carried the same gun. There also was no force of entry that took place in the crime scene. It would be long after Baca's habeas corpus petition that was denied in 2013 for the same reason, strong evidence that his appeal would be brought up by the Ninth Circuit Court, a liberal court, in 2015. Kamala office tries to defend the prior prosecutor who lied, which is a NAPU violation, or the knowing use of a false testimony by a prosecutor. One of the judges, Kozinski, who in 2 years following this case would resign on account of sexual misconduct, asks if the prosecutor has been prosecuted or disciplined for perjury, which Kamala prosecutor hasn't the faintest clue. Kamala Harris was not aware of the case misconduct. Josh Fletcher commented that the Attorney General office fought tooth and nail to keep the sentencing transcript away from the Court of Appeal, but the judge was referring back to Bill Locker, California then Attorney General, not Kamala tenure as California's Attorney General. Judge Wardlaw wanted to know why Tom Adair was never charged with the murders. Paul Vingred, if you forgot, was the prosecutor in both Baca's trials, would later comment that he believed in the murder for hire claim, but that there wasn't enough evidence to charge the son. The problem wasn't that Jana Baca was wrongfully convicted. The problem was that he had an unfair trial. That's why Judge Kozinski went off and demanded that her prosecutor get a hold of Kamala Harris and his supervisor. This was all recorded in video and uploaded on YouTube, garnering a good number of attention from both lawyers and law students. Kozinski gave them a week to think the case through, or else he'll be naming names. But 1 week passed by and nothing. Instead, her prosecutor delivered a message for 2 more weeks to carefully think the case through. So by January 29, 2015, her office backed off from the appeal, not because her office feared the court's wrath, but rather because the court made it difficult to handle this case. It's one thing to uphold justice, it's another to go extreme to the point where you ignore strong evidence. But this wouldn't be the last time a court prevented Kamala Harris from prosecuting because of a prosecutor's prosecutorial misconduct. A month after, Kamala Harris defended a Kern County prosecutor, Robert Murray, for his prosecutorial misconduct in order to ensure charges against Efrain Velasco Palacio, who was clearly guilty of child molestation, did not get dismissed. Murray was found falsifying 2 extra lines from a testimony. Therefore, the Kern County judge ruling was to dismiss the charges, and in response, the Kern District Attorney Office went to appeal the judge's dismissal to the 5th District Court of Appeal, who was also in favor of the judge ruling to drop all charges over misconduct. After Efrain Velasco Palacio was released, he in less than no time molested another child, and this time with 2 counts of unlawful sexual intercourse. Kamala Harris cared more about locking up a child molester than she did about losing face. While what Murray done was wrong, it was completely tone deaf for the judges to dismiss the charges. Surely inspired by the outrage of the Ninth Circuit Court from the Johnny Baca case, they disregarded common sense to uphold justice. I think the biggest misconception people have with Kamala Harris is that her being Attorney General doesn't mean she was directly involved in each case. She oversaw the California Department of Justice, which has over 4,000 of employees, including 1,000 lawyers in her office, and according to Black Woman Views on Medium.com, received an average of 20,000 to 30,000 caseloads from the Civil Law and Criminal Law Division. So with George Gage, Laura Bazelon is correct to say he was wrongfully convicted. But again, this was a case that happened long before Kamala Harris became Attorney General of California. It was a prosecutor by the name of Christopher Estelle who withheld exculpatory evidence to the defendant lawyer, another prosecutorial misconduct that showed Gage's stepchild Marianne was a pathological liar. A note written by her mother when Marianne was admitted for psychiatric care at a hospital. Marianne accused Gage of sexual assault, then kept piling more that were not said on trial that perplexed the judge, along with the lack of evidence in the case, to demand for a retrial. Estelle fought hard to win this case and got the judge dismissed. A second judge was appointed but asked to be dismissed after reading the medical reports that showed Marianne was a pathological liar, so a third judge was appointed and sided with the prosecutor. Now, Kamala Harris is finally involved indirectly when in April 7, 2015, 2 months after Efrain Velasco Palacio previous charges were officially dismissed, her office took the case against an appeal at the Ninth Circuit Court. The difference between how the Ninth Circuit Court handled the Johnny Baca case from the George Gage case is that Alex Kozinski demanded a Riverside County prosecutor to speak with his supervisor and with the AG, Kamala Harris, whereas this judge demanded her prosecutor to speak with his supervisor.
Of my word, I will go back to my supervisor and I will convey all this. If he is not already listening via the internet.
That's true. Hello there.
And I'd like to say hi to my mom, too.
Lastly, there's Jamel Truelove, who once endorsed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for president and vice president in 2020.
You can't be a sore loser. Your candidate didn't make it there. My candidate didn't make it there. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to get behind the candidate that is in front of us, and that's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
He really despised Trump, calling him a trick bag.
At the end of the day, I'm not going to fall into that Trump trick bag, and I suggest you don't either. Y'all make sure, man, y'all go and rock the vote for Biden and for Kamala. Peace.
But anyways, True Love was wrongfully convicted in 2010, so this was back when Harris was district attorney of San Francisco. But it was not Kamala Harris herself who prosecuted him. It was prosecutor Linda Allen. Kamala, being a top prosecutor, meant managing a team of prosecutors and assigning one a case. In an article from Vice, a former employee who wanted to stay anonymous said they worked at the San Francisco District Attorney Office. The former employer said, quote, "Prosecution like True Love would have had to be approved by Harris, but the approval process was a rubber stamp, and it was highly unlikely she was familiar with the details, instead relying on reviews conducted by deputies, including the head of the homicide unit," end quote. That means Harris saw the case at face value, believing what she was told by her office and the evidence given by the police. Evidence that was enough for the judge to convict True Love of first-degree murder. Kamala Harris never took credit for the prosecution, but she did credited an eyewitness bravery in stepping forward and testifying for the conviction. True Love got out of his conviction, won a $13.1 million settlement from the city of San Francisco, and had the police officers who framed him and prosecutor Linda Allen fired. And yet, True Love can't forgive Kamala Harris like Kevin Cooper did. One man has freedom, the other is still in prison. It's obvious Jamel True Love is getting paid to endorse Donald Trump, because how can he fear Trump but then do a complete 180, acting like his wingman? It's giving opportunists. I don't have a problem with someone switching parties or endorsing Trump. I voted for Trump in 2016 presidential election. But I do have a problem when it comes to someone being scared of Trump and then suddenly bowing down at his feet. It's cowardly. Laura Bazelon actually endorsed Kamala Harris. On X, she writes, "Dems, all of us need to make sure that Kamala Harris wins the presidency," end quote. And she wrote that 2019 opinion piece on Harris because there were a ton of Democrats, more progressive, running at the time. In addition to being critical of Harris in the past, I don't think Harris was the most progressive prosecutor in California, but she shouldn't be aiming to be the most progressive when it comes to public safety. Shiza Baldwin, a former district attorney of San Francisco, was known to be really progressive and someone that both True Love and Bazelon have praised. He got fired by the people of San Francisco due to the city being dealt with waves of criminal activity. Compare that to Kamala Harris, who was elected twice for San Francisco district attorney because she kept San Francisco safe from crimes. But she wasn't hard on crimes either. She was and is smart on crime. It's way too easy to criticize someone than it is to actually doing the work. Bazelon also writes, quote, "There is only one story. We elect a sane, competent candidate or we get Donald Trump," end quote.
She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
Blah, blah, blah. I'm so sick of listening to you.
Concerning Trump's transgender operation on illegal alien spew at the ABC News debate, he was referring to when then Attorney General Kamala Harris gave a trans woman inmate gender-affirming surgery in California and pushed for that policy.
When I was Attorney General, I learned that the California Department of Corrections, which was a client of mine, I didn't get to choose my clients.
Right, a client of the Attorney General.
A client of the Attorney General, right. Of the Office of Attorney General, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
But Harris did not fight to help trans women inmates get access to sex reassignment surgery. She lied. Even so, it's a misogynistic thing to say Kamala Harris is transphobic. You shouldn't expect a heterosexual woman to understand how transgender people feel in their bodies. In 2006, the San Francisco District Attorney Kamala Harris organized a conference to counter the gay panic and transgender panic, or LGBTQ plus panic argument used by defense attorneys that pretty much says that if people feel threatened, it's valid to murder gay, trans, or LGBTQ plus people. After a transgender teen, Gwen Arajo, was killed by a group of transphobic men.
What the Sigma?
Kamala Harris has always cared for the LGBTQ plus community. Kamala Harris fought a lawsuit from the Transgender Law Center against her client, the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, for denying gender-affirming healthcare on a transgender inmate. While I understand Harris had a sworn duty to defend the state or her clients as the Attorney General, she did have the option to not defend it if she found it to be unconstitutional, like what she did with Proposition 8, which was a law passed by the majority of California voters to ban same-sex marriages. Judge John S. Tigger ruled it unconstitutional as it went against the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment, to deny a trans inmate, Michelle Norsworthy, sex reassignment surgery. After the court granted a preliminary injunction ordering the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, CDCR, to provide Norsworthy, quote, with access to adequate medical care, including sex reassignment surgery, as promptly as possible, end quote. On April 2, 2015, Kamala Harris filed a notice that she would appeal the order to the Ninth Circuit Court and then sought a stay on April 10, 2015 for Tigger to change his mind and delay the surgery operation. This was signed in her name, arguing her client will be irreparable harm because it would have to pay for numerous of surgeries, like if one needs a nose job, to, quote, have a radical and permanent effect on their quality of life, end quote. The judge declined. So Kamala fought a third time to deny her of it, again in her own signature on May 4, 2015. Before the Ninth Circuit Court could hear her case, Michelle Norsworthy was coincidentally given approval on her parole, so she was technically kicked out of prison and never got the surgery that she won. Governor Jerry Brown had the power and authority to stop the parole, but he chose not to intervene. Harris was fully aware Michelle wasn't getting her state-paid sex reassignment surgery because she spoke out about it. Annie Brown, a writer and radio producer based in Oakland, writes in the California Sunday magazine, quote, "It didn't seem plausible that this was just a coincidence," said one of Michelle's attorneys, Lionel Turner. Attorney General Kamala Harris contended none of the defendant or the CDCR were involved in any aspect of the parole proceedings, end quote. The Ninth Circuit Court was not convinced by what Harris said. There were two similar cases in other states, one in Virginia and another in Georgia, where transgender inmates sued the Department of Corrections for denying them gender-affirming health care in prison, but then receiving parole before steps could be done for it to be ruled in court. Thus, on October 5th, 2015, the Ninth Circuit Court had no choice but to render the case as moot, denying Michelle of the surgery because she was released from prison. However, a 2-1 vote from the panel declined to vacate Tigger's preliminary injunction, which means Michelle's case can now be used to help other transgender inmates receive gender-affirming surgery. There's no excuse. Kamala Harris was without a doubt against the surgery, but that doesn't make her transphobic. California always had a clinic to provide gender-affirming healthcare for transgender inmates since 1999. Also on Sunday magazine, it says 1998, but I think it is closer to 1999 because according to writer Emily Alpert from In the Fray 2005, Dr. Lori Kohler was asked by the chief medical officer for the Vacaville facility, Dr. Joseph Big to help establish its first trans care clinic for inmates in 1999. In Tally Woodward's 2008 article, Life in Hell in California Prison, an unconventional gender identity can be like an added sentence. She writes, Chief Medical Officer Big noted that trans inmates do not have access to sex reassignment surgery, saying, quote, it is essential for a society to be concerned about the health of those it chooses to incarcerate, end quote, and that both doctors, Kohler and Big, stress that appropriate care can have a huge impact on the lives of inmates once they leave prison, end quote. The clinic provided them with hormone therapy, so yes, Michelle Norsworthy did receive gender-affirming health care, but the thought of sex reassignment surgery in prisons was unprecedented, not just in California, but in all states. Even Elizabeth Warren, the most progressive Democrat, didn't agree with providing reassignment gender surgery to transgender prisoners, at least initially, until being for it in 2019. On October 20, 2015, California became the first state to implement a policy to allow transgender inmates access to gender-affirming surgery in prisons. Kamala Harris was forced to work in the legislature to write that policy because another transgender inmate demanded sex reassignment surgery, but this inmate was life without parole, so she couldn't be kicked out like they did Michelle. Her name is Salo Quinn. She won her case on August 7, 2015, 4 months after Michelle's victory. On a news article from Cap Radio, Ben Aldler reported that the CDCR insisted it would not set a precedent or establish an example to be followed where a transgender inmate demands surgery by agreeing to pay for Quinn's surgery. In order to accomplish that, it planned to prevent a legal precedent from happening by not paying for Michelle's surgery, resulting the case as moot. As we know, the CDCR failed to prevent that legal precedent. As for the policy that Harris had to work around to change to include SRS, it limited the number of trans inmates who could be approved for the surgery, one of the criteria being 2 years before their parole. On February 23, 2016, the state dropped its request for the court to vacate Tigger's ruling and agreed to provide almost $500,000 to cover Michelle's attorney's fees and costs. In addition, almost 2 years after Quinn won her case, Quinn finally received her surgery. It's thanks to the Transgender Law Center's attorneys as well as law firm Morgan, Lewis and Bokius LLP working as pro bono co-counsel, aka volunteering for fighting for the surgery. It's thanks to the judge John S. Tigger for doing what was right. It's thanks to Obama for appointing him as a judge. But most obviously, it is thanks to Michelle Norsworthy and Silo Quinn for demanding their rights for health care. Kamala Harris did get asked in a 2019 interview from the Washington Blade if she believes all transgender prisoners around the globe should have access to sex reassignment surgery.
I believe that we are at a point where we have got to stop vilifying people based on sexual orientation, and we've got to understand that when we are talking about, in particular, the transgender community, for too long they've been the subject of bias and, frankly, a lack of understanding about their circumstance and their physical needs in addition to any other needs they have, and it's about time that we have a better understanding of that.
So I do believe Harris, according to the facts, didn't do much to give these trans women inmates their surgery, but that does not make her transphobic. As she mentioned, there is a lack of understanding about their circumstance and physical needs. It's why choosing Tim Walz, a Minnesota governor who passed a bill to allow access to all gender-affirming care, as her vice president is a great way forward. We finally made it to what is the center of revoking Brat Summer, or Brat in general, genocide. I'd argue it's completely incorrect and ignorant to accuse and vilify Kamala of genocide. It's no question that bombing children is inhumane and wrong even in the midst of a war. Soldiers avoid targeting children. I believe there's also a law protecting children in those situations. Realistically though, it's unavoidable to not harm children, and that's why all wars are bad. Harris demanded an immediate ceasefire since March of this year, and she wants both Israelis and Palestinians to make peace. 1. She believes Israel has a right to defend itself as well as getting its people back against a terrorist group, Hamas. And 2. She believes the Palestinian people have the right to their dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. Peace isn't truly peace until both sides can actually treat each other as equals, like brothers and sisters, like family. So during her rally in Kalamazoo, Michigan, there was a protester yelling, "No more Gaza war." Roll the clip.
We are fighting for America's future, and we understand the opportunity we have before us to turn the page on the fear Thank you all. And listen, on the topic of Gaza, we must end that war. And we must end the war and bring the hostages home. But now I am speaking about 2024. All right.
That protester has every right to be angry and to shout at Harris on an injustice. Harris understands people's frustration, but it's meaningless if she doesn't win the election. Politics is pretty much a game, and Harris learned early on in her career in politics to avoid stirring the pot, especially in this extraordinary election, because absolutely there are voters in support of Israel. Whether you are pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, I think we can all agree that we're all sick of this war or genocide or the loss of human lives. What happened on October 7 shouldn't be ignored. These were human lives taken away. So while I'm against the further action taken by Israel, nobody should be discounting what happened that day. And I'm sure some will argue that Israel started this or whatever. I'd argue both sides are responsible and committed to this genocide. This has been going on for a long time, a cycle of hate that needs to end, so that both Palestinians and Israelis can treat each other as equals. Just take a look at Tom Waits' song from 2006 called Road to Peace, where he criticizes Israel but also acknowledges that both sides are responsible for this continuous hatred for each other. Seriously, listen to it. I do want to mention that when Charlie XCX rizzed Kamala Harris up, there were comments giving her shade. Why is she endorsing someone for president of the United States when she's not American? And my response to that is, why are you concerned about what goes on in Gaza when you're an American? See how dumb that is? It's important to have leaders who are good to their people and aren't dictators, so it's perfectly normal, if not encouraged, to be interested in other countries' business. So who their leaders are does not only affect America but other countries. There are people from Canada, Australia, all parts of the world invested in American politics. I believe people can both advocate and vote for someone to do the right thing, to have faith and hope they'll do what they promise to achieve. If that's not convincing, just look back at her record where she made the tough decision to not seek the death penalty as a top prosecutor. The president has to make tough decisions, and Harris is no stranger to that. Because again, it's way too easy to criticize someone than it is to actually doing the work. As a prosecutor, Harris' career centered in prosecuting people engaged in sexual assault and giving justice to those survivors, especially women and children. I assure you, Harris cares more about the Palestinian people than you anti-brats. When it comes to children, Harris will put her foot down, not just Palestinian children, but also the children in Israel. It's worth consideration that Harris' stepdaughter, Ella Emhoff, is for Palestine and still supports Ramallah. I do believe a mother and daughter bond is strong, and the fact Emhoff trusts Harris is a huge green flag. So there you have it. Kamala is brat. Thank you for listening to me yap, and I hope this video was educational enough to understand and get rid of all the misinformation. Feel free to agree or disagree with me, and I'll end this video with a quote by the majestic Maya Angelou.
The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free. And every one of us needs to say to our children, children, this is your world. Come out, stand out, earn it.